video, we're going to be factoring basic quadratic expressions in the form x squared plus bx plus c with me, Catherine. Our objectives for this video are to factor expressions in the form x squared plus bx plus c. The first part, though, I'm going to review the greatest common factor. We're going to review FOIL, remember, that's first, outside, inside, last. And then we're going to get right into factoring expressions. The greatest common factor. The first step in factoring is to find the greatest common factor for the terms of a polynomial. The greatest common factor, or GCF, is the largest term that is a factor of all the terms. A term is a single number, a variable, or combination of a number and variable multiplied together. Terms are separated by plus or minus signs in an expression. A polynomial is an expression with two or more terms. In this video, we're only going to be looking at quadratic expressions. Let's factor out the greatest common factor. The first thing that we're going to do is we're going to look at each term. 4x squared is 2 times 2 times x times x. 32 is 2 times 2 times x times 8. And 28 is 2 times 2 times 7. Now you're going to notice that I put common factors on top of each other. That makes it really easy to see what our greatest common factor is. And for this one, it's 4. To continue, we first put the 4 outside of parentheses. Now we start to divide 4 from each term. 4x squared divided by 4 is x squared. 32x divided by 4 is 8x. And finally, 28 divided by 4 is 7. Some of you will say, hey, I know that we can factor the inside farther, but we haven't gotten that far yet in this video. We'll look at it later. FOIL. Hopefully you remember that FOIL is first, outside, inside, last. So let's do it. First, well, we're going to take x times x. Outside is x times negative 6. Inside is 2 times x. And finally, last is 2 times negative 6. Let's actually figure this out. X times x is x squared. X times negative 6 is negative 6x. 2 times x is 2x. And 2 times negative 6 is negative 12. We need to collect like terms next. We're going to have x squared, but 6x plus 2x, well, they're like terms. So we'll have minus 4x. And finally, subtract 12. That's it. What does it mean to factor a quadratic expression? Well, first of all, a quadratic expression is an expression with a degree of 2. That means the largest exponent is 2. Here are some examples. Factor. In this case, factor means unfoiling. We are looking for two binomials when multiplied together, that means when we FOIL them, give us the quadratic expression. And here's some examples. So basically what we're doing is we're unfoiling. Because if I FOIL this, I get x squared plus 11x plus 30. Foiling this, I get z squared minus 7z minus 44. And finally, foiling that, I get 4x squared plus 32x plus 28. So in this case, we're going to go backwards. We're going to be given the quadratic expression. For instance, x squared plus 11x plus 30. And we're going to be asked to find the binomial x plus 5 times x plus 6. Let's try one. The first thing we always ask, is there a greatest common factor? So I'm looking here. I have a 1 in front of the x squared, a negative 4, and negative 12. None of them have a greatest common factor other than 1. Then I have an x squared, an x, and then no x. Well, there's no greatest common factor there either, so we'll say no. Now this is where the fun starts. The first thing I'm going to do, and you don't have to do this once you get good at it, is write x squared plus bx plus c underneath it. That tells me that b is negative 4 and c is negative 12. This is important because the whole idea is we're going to be multiplying and adding. We need to multiply to our c. That means we're going to find the numbers that multiply to the constant, in our case, negative 12. But they also have to add to the middle coefficient of negative 4. So let's get to it. At this point, we're just going to start guessing. I know that negative 1 times 12 is negative 12. Negative 1 plus 12 is negative 11. The numbers have to multiply to negative 12 and add to negative 4 at the same time. And in this case, it doesn't. Let's look at another one. Negative 2 times 6 is negative 12. Well, that works. Negative 2 plus 6 is 4. Not quite. But do you notice that we get a 4 and we're looking for a negative 4? How about we just change the signs? So in this case, we're going to take 2 times negative 6 equals negative 12. That satisfies the first one. Then 2 plus negative 6 equals negative 4. And that's what we want. Now it's super easy. You're going to make two parentheses. The first part is our x. Well, why is that? Well, remember, when we do FOIL, we do first, which is x times x, and that needs to give us our x squared. How do we figure out the other numbers? Actually, they're right in front of us. I'm going to put my positive 2 here, and my subtract 6 there. And guess what? We did it! That's it! You're probably thinking, now, wait a second, that was too easy. Well, let's FOIL it. When I FOIL, I end up with x squared minus 6x plus 2x minus 12, which gives us x squared minus 4x minus 12. Hey, perfect, we did it! What if I factor and get x minus 6 times x plus 2? Guess what? It's the same thing. You did it. Because it doesn't matter if we have x plus 2 times x minus 6 or x minus 6 times x plus 2. They both FOIL into x squared minus 4x minus 12. Let's try another example. The first thing we have to ask, is there a greatest common factor? And in this case, no greatest common factor. Next, we have to figure out what we need to multiply and add to factor. I like to write x squared plus bx plus c underneath my expression. Once you get good at this, you don't have to do it anymore. But I can definitely see I'm going to multiply to negative 16. That's my c. And I'm going to add to 6. Now, let's start guessing. Negative 1 times 16 is negative 16. Negative 1 plus 16 is 15. Well, that doesn't work because it has to add to 6. Negative 4 times 4 is negative 16. Well, that works. But negative 4 plus 4 equals 0, and that one doesn't work. What about negative 2 times 8? Well, once again, that's negative 16. Negative 2 plus 8, hey, we got our 6. Now the next step is to make our parentheses, and I already put the x's in there, because remember when we FOIL, our first is x times x, which has to be our x squared. Next, easy. We just put in subtract 2 and plus 8, and we did it. Maybe you did 8 times negative 2. Well, in that case, you would have x plus 8 times x minus 2, and it doesn't matter. Let's check by FOILing, just to make sure we're right. We're going to do first x times x, which is x squared. Then we're going to do the outside, which is x times negative 2, which is negative 2x. The inside, which is 8 times x, which is 8x. And finally, the last, which is 8 times negative 2, which is negative 16. We're going to collect like terms, so we end up with x squared plus 6x minus 16. So, hey, what exactly does that mean? It means that x squared plus 6x minus 16 can be factored into x minus 2 times x plus 8. Or you could have x plus 8 times x minus 2. They're exactly the same. Now it's your turn to practice. You're going to pause the video, factor, and then press play to check. Alright, let's look at this first one. The thing we always ask, is there a greatest common factor? In this case, there's not, because I have a 1, and a negative 12. The only common factor here would be 1. If I look at my variable, I have an x squared and an x, and then no variable. So in this case, no, we don't have a greatest common factor. Now we need to think about what we're going to multiply and what we have to add to factor. Let's write x squared plus bx plus c. And we can definitely see we're going to multiply to negative 12, but at the same time, it has to add to 1. So let's start guessing. Well, I know that 2 times negative 6 is negative 12. Kind of wrote these together too close. So we'll do the addition over here. 2 plus negative 6 is negative 4. And that doesn't quite work, does it? Let's try 3 times negative 4. Well, that for sure gives us negative 12. 3 plus negative 4, well, that gives us negative 1. But guess what? It's just the opposite of what we want. So let's change our signs. This time, we're going to say negative 3 times 4 equals negative 12. Negative 3 plus 4, well, guess what? That equals our 1, and we're almost done. Our next step is to make our parentheses. And since I have x squared, I'm going to have x and x. What goes on the inside? I'm going to put negative 3 here, or subtract 3, and then an add 4. And that's it. Let me write it out a little nicer. Perfect. You can also have x plus 4 times x minus 3. Now I'm going to let you FOIL those on your own, but guess what? We're right. Let's look at the next one. We need to figure out what we have to multiply and add to factor. So let me write this under here, x squared plus bx plus c. Oh, you caught me. Is there a greatest common factor in this one? No, because we have a 1, a 4, and a negative 4, and an x squared, and an x, and no x. So we don't have a greatest common factor. I always forget to do that. We need to multiply to negative 4 and also add to positive 4. Wow. Let's try it. Let's say I have negative 2 times 2. Well, that for sure is negative 4. But negative 2 plus 2, well, that's 0. So that doesn't work. What if I try negative 1 times 4? Well, that's negative 4. But negative 1 plus 4? No, that's 3. And I can't think of anything else. So guess what? This one is actually called prime. It's already in its factored form. Yeah, it was a little trick question, but that's okay. It didn't hurt. Let's look at another example. The first thing that we always ask, is there a greatest common factor? And in this case, nope, there isn't. This time, I'm just going to look at my expression. I need to multiply to negative 44, that's my C, but also add to negative 7, that's my B. Let's start guessing. I know that negative 2 times 22 is negative 44, but when I add negative 2 plus 22, I get 20, and that's not quite it. Negative 4 times 11 is negative 44. Negative 4 plus 11, well, that's positive 7. Let's just change the signs. 4 times negative 11 is still negative 44. But when we add 4 plus negative 11, we get negative 7. Great! We're almost done. We're going to make our parentheses. And in this case, we're going to have z's. Because remember, when we FOIL, the first term needs to be z squared. So z times z is z squared. Now, all we have to do is put in our plus 4 and our subtract 11. And we did it! Maybe you put in negative 11 times 4. Well, in that case, you'll have z minus 11 times z plus 4, and it doesn't matter. Let's check by foiling. We're going to do first, outside, inside, last. So we'll have z squared minus 11z plus 4z minus 44. That'll give us z squared minus 7z minus 44, which is exactly what we want. So what exactly does this mean? It means that when we factor z squared minus 7z minus 44, we get z plus 4 times z minus 11, or z minus 11 times z plus 4. It doesn't matter. Now that you have a handle on that one, you're going to pause the video, factor these two, and then press play to check. Let's look at these two. We need to figure out what we're going to multiply and add to factor. The first thing we need to do is look, do I have a greatest common factor? Well, I have a 1, a negative 5, and a negative 14. Nope. I have a y squared, a y, and then no y. So no, we don't have a greatest common factor. I need to multiply to negative 14, which is my c, but also add to negative 5 at the same time. So let's start guessing. I know that negative 2 times 7 is negative 14. And I didn't give myself enough room again. That's okay. Negative 2 plus 7, well, that's 5. And that's almost it. Let's just change the signs. 2 times negative 7 equals negative 14. Great. And in this case, 2 plus negative 7, well, that's our negative 5. That's the magic number. Our next step is to make parentheses. And in this case, we want y squared. So I'm going to put a y and a y, because y times y is y squared. Now here's the easiest part. I'm going to have plus 2 and then a minus 7. And you just did it. Maybe you said negative 7 times 2. Well, in that case, yours will look like this. Y minus 7 times y plus 2. But guess what? It doesn't matter. And I'm going to let you foil those. Let's look at the next one. Before I forget, we have to figure out, is there a greatest common factor? We have a 1, an 11, and a 28. Nope. X squared, x, and no x. So in this case, nope, there's no greatest common factor. So let's figure out what we have to multiply and add to factor. In this case, I have to multiply to 28, but also add to 11 at the same time. 7 times 4, that's my 28. And guess what? 7 plus 4 is, yeah, it's 11. We did it right away. Our next step is to make our parentheses. And in this case, we want x squared, so we're going to put an x and an x. And now all we have to do is basically copy. Here's my 7, here's my 4, and we just did it. Some of you might have done 4 times 7. Well, in that case, you'll have x plus 4 times x plus 7. And guess what? It doesn't matter. But I'm going to let you foil these just to double check. The first thing we always ask, is there a greatest common factor? Well, let's look at our terms. We have 5x squared, 15x, and 140. Some of you will probably see it right away. 5x squared is 5 times x times x, 15x is 5 times 3 times x, and 140 is 5 times 28. In this case, yes, we do have a greatest common factor, and that's 5. So what we have to do is make a parentheses with our 5 outside, and we need to start dividing. 5x squared divided by 5 is x squared. Negative 15x divided by 5 is minus 3x. And finally, negative 140 divided by 5 is negative 28. And now we have to continue. So I'm just going to erase that part. We need to look inside here and see if we can factor. So let's figure out our multiplication and our addition. We need to multiply to negative 28, but at the same time, we have to add to negative 3. Let's start guessing. I know that 7 times negative 4 is negative 28. 7 minus 4 is 3. Well, we need a negative 3, so let's just change the signs. Negative 7 times 4 is still negative 28, but this time, negative 7 plus 4 is negative 3, and that's what we want. So what is it going to factor into? Well, x minus 7 and x plus 4. That's it. Let's say you said 4 times negative 7. In that case, you'll have x plus 4 times x minus 7. But guess what? It doesn't matter. So let's continue. We're going to look at the left here. I still have my 5. But instead of writing x squared minus 3x minus 28, I'm going to write its factored form, x minus 7 times x plus 4. And guess what? That's our answer. Yeah, that's it. But let's check by foiling. The first thing that I do is actually FOIL x minus 7 times x plus 4. That'll give us x squared plus 4x minus 7x minus 28. Let's keep going. Now we're going to have x squared minus 3x minus 28. The last piece, distribute. 5 times x squared is 5x squared. 5 times negative 3 is negative 15x. And finally, 5 times negative 28, yep, negative 140. Whew, that one wasn't too bad at all, was it? Let's try another example. In this one, we have 4g squared plus 4g minus 8. We always have to ask, is there a greatest common factor? Well, let's look at our terms. 4g squared, 4g, and 8. 4g squared is 4 times g times g. 4g is 4 times g. And 8 is 4 times 2. We can definitely see that 4 is our greatest common factor. Our next step is to write the 4 in a parentheses. To figure out what's inside the parentheses, we have to divide each term by 4. We're going to get g squared plus g minus 2. Great! But we're not quite done, because we still have to look inside this parentheses. We need to try to factor. Well, I know I'm going to multiply to negative 2, because that's my c. Also know I have to add to 1, because that's my b. So let's start guessing. Well, I know that 2 times negative 1 is negative 2. And 2 plus negative 1, we did it right away, is 1. Now let's factor. I know I'm going to have g plus 2, and then g minus 1. Cool. Now we're going to substitute that back in. So now we have 4. Hopefully you don't forget to bring out your greatest common factor, because that's still part of our answer. And that's it. Let's check by foiling. We're going to FOIL g plus 2 times g minus 1. Our first is g squared. Our outside is minus g. Our inside is 2g. And our last is negative 2. Let's collect like terms. G squared plus g minus 2. What? Our last step is to distribute our greatest common factor. 4g squared plus 4g minus 8. Perfect! So what exactly does this mean? That means that 4g squared plus 4g minus 8 factors into 4 times g plus 2 times g minus 1. Or 4 times g minus 1 times g plus 2. Here's 2 for you to practice. You're going to pause the video, factor, and then press play to check. Alright, let's look at these. The first thing we ask, is their greatest common factor? So let's check. We have 3y squared, which is 3 times y times y. Then we have 27y, which is 3 times y, and then times 9. And then finally, we have 54, which is 3 times 9 times 2. So let's 3. The only thing we have in common is our 3. So that's going to be our greatest common factor. So let's factor that out. We're going to have 3. We're going to start dividing. So 3y squared divided by 3 is y squared. 27y divided by 3 is 9. And finally, 9y, sorry about that. And then finally, 54 divided by 3 is 18. Our next step is to factor. Well, looking at this, I know I have to multiply to 18, but also add to 9. Well, I know that 2 times 9 is 18. I never give myself enough room, but 2 plus 9 is 11, so that's not quite it. Let's take 6 times 3. Well, that's 18. And if I take 6 plus 3, guess what I get? I get 9, so that's it. I'm going to have 3 parentheses. I'm going to have y plus 6, and then y plus 3. And we did it! Yeah, that's no problem. Let's look at the second one. If you remember, we take the smallest exponent. So I know my greatest common factor is going to be x to the first. So let's divide that out. X to the third divided by x is x squared. Negative 4x squared divided by x is negative 4x. And finally, negative 21x divided by x is negative 21. Okay, that wasn't bad. Well, I have to multiply to negative 21. Let's make it farther. Okay, now we have room. And I have to add to negative 4. Wow. I know 3 times negative 7 is negative 21. And we guessed exactly right. 3 plus negative 7 is actually our negative 4. Wow, we couldn't do any better than that. So our next step, we're going to have x plus 3, and then x minus 7. Maybe you said x minus 7 times x plus 3. In that case, yours will factor like this. And we did it. I'm going to let you FOIL both of these just to double check. Here's the self-quiz. You're going to pause the video, factor, then press play to check. Try not to peek. Try to do it just from memory. All right, let's see how you did. The first thing we have to ask, is there a greatest common factor? Well, I have a 1, a 13, and a 40. So there's no greatest common factor there. I have z squared, z, and then no z. So nope, we don't have a greatest common factor. Let's figure out our multiplication and our addition. Well, we need to multiply to 40 and then add to 13. Let's start guessing. I know that 4 times 10 is 40. Great. But when I take 4 plus 10, I get 14. And that's not quite it, is it? How about we take 8 times 5? Well, 8 times 5 is 40. When I take 8 plus 5, guess what we get? 13. Yeah, that's it. The last part is super easy. So let's make our parentheses. Make sure they hook, because that means multiplication. I have z squared, so I have to have z and a z. Now the second part, here's my plus 8, and here's my plus 5. Perfect. Some of you may have said 5 times 8. In that case, you'll have z plus 5 times z plus 8. But guess what? It doesn't matter, because let's FOIL. I'm going to have z squared plus 8z plus 5z plus 40. Collecting like terms, we end up with z squared plus 13z plus 40, which is exactly what we started with. So we're going to go like this because it makes it really pretty. Either one is perfect, and you don't have to write both of them. Let's look at our second one. Well, we have 7, negative 35, and 42. Definitely there's something in common here. 7y squared is 7 times y times y. 35y is 7 times 5 times y. And 42 is 7 times 6. So definitely our greatest common factor is 7. The first thing we have to do, divide it out. Here's my 7 and my parentheses. 7y squared divided by 7 is y squared. Negative 35y divided by 7 is negative 5y. 42 divided by 7 is actually 6. Cool. Now we need to try and factor this one. Most of the time it works, but sometimes it doesn't. I need to multiply to 6, all right, but it also has to add to negative 5. Oh my goodness. Well, I know that 2 times 3 is 6. 2 plus 3, well, that's 5. Let's make these negative. Let's see what happens. Negative 2 times negative 3 is still a positive 6. Negative 2 times negative plus, sorry about that, plus negative 3, there's our negative 5. Bringing down our 7, we can't forget our greatest common factor. We'll end up with y minus 2, and then y minus 3. Maybe you said negative 3 times negative 2. Then in your case, you'll have 7 y minus 3 times y minus 2. But they're exactly the same. I'm going to FOIL this one just to prove it to you. The inside, we're going to have y squared minus 2y minus 3y plus 6, because negative 3 times negative 2 is a positive 6. Let's collect our like terms. We're not quite done because our last step is to distribute. So we'll have 7y squared, negative 35y, and then finally 7 times 6 is 42. And we end up at our original. So that means either one of these is perfect, but you don't have to write both, just one or the other. Thanks for watching. I know this was a long video, but factoring is so important. If you liked it, pin me to Pinterest. Remember, the only way to get good at factoring is to practice, practice, practice. Do you have a request? Let me know at picrustable@gmail.com. Thanks for watching, and I can't wait till you join me again for another exciting episode.